Hi everyone, welcome to my next video on micro-frontends. In this video today we're going to be discussing routing within your micro-frontend configuration. So routing is an important topic because when you think about remotes and what the scope of a remote may be, this could be a remote that maybe encapsulates a widget or a component that's on a web page, or it could be an entire page. In some cases, you might even want to put routes within a micro front end to encapsulate kind of a larger chunk of whatever that remote functionality is. When we talk about how to configure the routes within our application, the application configuration, does it live in the host, in the shell? Does it live within a remote? How do we get those configured, and can we keep both applications decoupled from each other? These are the topics we'll be going over today. So on my screen here, I have a host and shell application with a number of different router paths. In the paths here, we have some that are already configured that I've been using in my samples so far. This includes just the products and the cart page. But for this video, we're going to consider just a new scenario where we have a new contact route. So think of this route as kind of like a About Us or Contact Us page that you would see on a website. So let's say that our initial requirement is to just add a single route with a page with information that a customer could reach out to us. Maybe it's a mailing address, phone number, whatever it is, right? Now we could put this in a contact module, and we could make this contact module its own federated remote. Well, what if down the road we got future requirements to add a contact us form and a contact us chat? Well, if we add these new components, do they all become federated remotes that are separate modules with the router living at the host application? Or do they become basically a router inside of the remote where when you hit this contact route, we could have the contact module take over the router configuration? There's a couple of ways to configure this, but when we think about having these nested routes and components within a module, we could go and we could obviously add the initial route into our host application. This would mean we have to deploy our host and our shell application. We then go and deploy our remote module, right, our contact module, or maybe we deploy contract first, but in either way, there's a dependency in the host. This is kind of unavoidable for at least the first release, in my opinion. I think that when you talk about simplicity, if you can have, honestly, the host application kind of own all of the routing structure, it's the simplest approach, right? It's the least complex, and really from a coupling standpoint, there is a little bit of coupling, right, with the host and these modules kind of releasing in lockstep, but it does offer a pretty simple non-collision approach to routing, right? So when you start talking about modules being able to deal with their own routes, if you had maybe an example that was a little different where you could kind of federate out your router paths back to the host and maybe register them. This is probably an approach as well. You know, when you talk about federation, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a component. It could be JSON. But this is certainly an option as well, where you could have this dynamic, this remote here receiving this, request to load from the host application. It's federating out its router config, and then you're configuring the router within the host application. This is probably complex. I would, again, if you can lean towards a very simple model where the host is owning the router configuration, this is what I would advise. Let's jump into some code examples here, and let's try to figure out how we can approach this. What does it mean for us in the code, and what are some of the issues we've run into? So I'm building on my previous micro front end that I've used in my other videos. So if you haven't watched those videos, definitely watch them. The mono repo that I have here, I'm in my host application, and if I go into my app, I can see my router config here, and probably the first step we want to do is we want to add this new route. So right now it's just basically a simple div, right? It's this easy to go into React Router, add a new route. Now, the first step into adding the route here is we want to be able to load a component, right? So this would be kind of the dependency from the host to the remote, right? This is our kind of first dependency here. Well, we can't go and lazy load it yet because we don't have a component. Let's go make one of those components. Because of my TypeScript configuration within my monorepo, I'm just going to go ahead and put everything under products here. I'm not going to make a dedicated features folder for right now. So right now I'm just going to put a contact component in here. And basically the idea with this component is to just return something simple so we can make sure this works. Because we're in the monorepo here, the next thing we can do is download these types using the federated types plugin. And a quick note on the federated types plugin, if you're within the monorepo and you're trying to consume local types and these types are guaranteed to match just what's in the other directory, meaning that you're not trying to consume a particular version of that remote that's maybe already deployed out there and those types no longer match what's in your current branch in another directory. And even if you're not in a monorepo, right, you just have to consume those types. Then, using, again, if they match, using the monorepo and TypeScript project references is the way to go. And if they do not match, then I would suggest you use that URL and download them remotely, right? So in our case, we're just going to run nxserve here. nxserve is going to just we're going to basically just download these types using the plugin. So we have our new contact type here, and we're going to go into our application and we're just going to reference this new type. So in here, let's go ahead and pull this in. And again, this is going to be using the hero, which is the name of our remote, and it's the contact component. So at this point, we've got this real component in here. I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this in suspense. And we should be able to run this and see the contact component at the contact route. So I'm going to just open up this remote here, and I'm going to go into contact, and you'll see the contact remote shows on the page here. So now that we have the remote up and running, the kind of next step here is to think about, well, this is just adding another component, right? We're just exposing it, we're just importing it. How do we actually add these new routes? So we know if we add them at the host level, it's very easy because I can just come in here and I would just expose out the contact form, the contact chat, and I would add the new paths right here in the remote, and it would be pretty typical development, right? So let's go back to our remote here, and let's add the various components just to have them here so we can start going through our code examples. And we'll just do something like this, start contact form, and we'll make a contact chat. So now that these components are here, we'll go ahead and export them. And basically, let me just fix the component names. So these are all ready to be consumed, right? So at this point, it would be roughly that simple to go in here and just expose these out and federate them, right? So we don't really need to walk through the example of having just separate paths in the host. Like we know this will work, right? There's really no question about that. So I'm going to just remove them out of here. Just focus on this contact thing. So let me go ahead real quick and add in the nav bar this contact component, just so we have kind of an easy link to get to contact. And basically, let's start with the contact module here owning the routing configuration. So in this point, let's say on this contact form, I wanted to have a link that basically pointed to form, and we'll just call this contact form here. And let's go ahead and pull in the component that we need to. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go ahead and just pull in this. So we should have a link here from React Router DOM. Okay, so let's add in the chat as well. So we're going to say chat. And if we run this, right, we would pretty much expect this not to work because the router has no context here, right? So if we look, you'll see that it's failing literally because of the context, and it'll say that cannot destructure property base name of use context here. And this is coming from React Router. And the reason why this is happening is because in this module, like this is the literal module being exposed, you're trying to use a link component, but React Router doesn't exist in this module scope, right? So if I went to the module config here and let's try to just mark this as shared. So what we're going to do is let's check what version of React Router we're using. And we are using, okay, 6.15. So if I come in here and I will set this on not only the remote, but I will set this on the host as well. So I'll go ahead and add this here. So now it's set up and it's a singleton and it's sharing out these versions. I'm going to stop Webpack, let it come in and rebundle as it needs to. And if I refresh, well, I don't have to refresh here, but you can see that it's rendering. Now, if I click these, let's see what the error message says. So basically says that there's no match here, right? Contact form doesn't exist. Now, again, I'm sharing these. So now, because it's a singleton, it's able to go and actually find this particular path, right? This path exists. Or sorry, the context exists, I should say. So it can hook into that React context. It's a singleton. It's going to reference the other module. The problem is, though, is I'm not exposing this component, so I can't come in here and add the path. I mean, technically, I could go and expose it again and re-add the path. And then in that case, I could use, router-specific components here, right? Or even hooks, right? Use navigate any of those hooks because I have a context, an underlying context through the shared singleton. Now, it's an interesting example here because, again, it goes back to kind of the dilemma of who owns the routing configuration. Well, if I put the routing configuration in the host, you would also probably want to share React Router, right? Because if you don't share React Router, you saw what happens. You have no context, it blows up. So let's say that we wanted to put this routing configuration within our remote application, right? So if we're using React Router and we go and we put basically a router provider in our remote, let's see what happens. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to add the router. In this case, I'm just going to use a simple router here. So I'm going to just paste some code that I already wrote here just to kind of keep the video moving. So in this case here, you're going to have I'm going to use a memory router, and I am going to, let's see here. Let's just keep this as an outlet for now. And we've got our contact here, and this is going to return this. Okay, so we have our memory router, and in the memory router, what we're going to do is we're going to set the base path. So, why is the base path here important? So let's clean up some of this other noise first, and we'll go ahead and kind of talk through this. So this is going to become I'm just going to call this contact info. And let's go ahead and import these other components here. And now it's fixed most of the errors. I'm going to actually come in and change this original contact component, because remember, this is our federated component, right? This is actually what's being exposed externally. So now I've got a router, and in our router here, I have a base path. And if I go back to my application, this is called contact. So in here, I could call this contact as well. And let's take these initial entries here. Let's just remove them. So this is just extra config here for the router. Well, the index will be the info page, just like it was before. And now we have a form and a chat. Let's go back to our application, and let's just go back to the home page here. We'll click contact, and you'll see that it fails right away, saying that we cannot render a router inside of another router. And the reason why that's happening is because of the shared singletons, right? It sees that router. So this is a safeguard within React Router. It's a singleton. It's trying to render two of these, and it notices that there's two, and it won't work. So we have to go in here, and we have to stop sharing React Router. That's the first step here. Now that we've stopped sharing it, if we go back to our application and we reload it, let's go to contact here, and it's going to say that there's no route that matches the /URL. Let's see where that is. Yeah, so basically, we just got to revert that real quick. Okay, so now it's fixed. So now you can see that it's kind of weird. And this is where some of the complexity starts, where we start having these nested, basically routers within our application. So now that we have our own router, even though we're pointing to contact, it's really the root route, right? It is the default route. So now if I click on contact form, you can see contact form shows up. Let me go back to contact. You can see contact chat. And again, this is using the memory router. So it's going to be a little wonky, but this is just an example. You would hit this using the browser router as well. Well, now that we have these, and this is seemingly working, let's keep kind of enhancing this a little bit. And let's say that in contact form, we want to go back to the home route. Now, I think this is, let's just call it return to, let's call this return to contact info, just to kind of give it a name. And I'm going to come into the chat too, and I'm going to do the same thing here, and just let's import link. So let me go back here, we'll refresh. So if I go back and I click return to contact info, you can see that I can browse back and forth. Everything seemingly works fine. Now I don't know why you would kind of do this next step here, but let's just keep kind of enhancing this. So we're going to put return to home. So let's pretend we had to go back to the base route in our application, right? The very, very home page, right? So now you'll notice if I click it that there is no home route, right? There's no home to go to. And again, the main reason here is because the index route is contact info. This is your root route in the context of your module, the remote modules, React router context, right? So in its configuration, this is the home route. Otherwise, this seemingly works pretty well. Let's try a page refresh. So one thing you'll also notice too is that the URL here doesn't change. So instead of contact/form, you'll see that it's just contact, and then of course when I refresh, it goes back to contact, right? Because it's the host's router taking control again. So you can see that this can lead to some complexities, right? This is a kind of a journey to go through and figure out exactly how we make this work. And really the way that this ends up working is that you have to develop a mechanism to sync the state between the host's router implementation and the child module's router implementation. And the main thing here is that those contexts, right, will get out of sync if you don't. So kind of as you see it here, you're on this form context, but the URL doesn't change. So when I refresh it, it's refreshing, but it can't derive that you're on this /form route, and the host application doesn't know about form because slash form doesn't exist in its context. It's only in the child context, right? So at this point here, we've got kind of the beginnings of, okay, I have this federated router. I'm using a memory router here. You could use the browser router. You really don't want to though, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to control routing from the host, sync it down into the module, and then sync the module back up to the host, right? So it's kind of a complicated mess of problems, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add contact star, and we're going to point it back to any of our components here. So it doesn't really affect anything. It's just basically any kind of subpath there as it matches will send us there. So that's the first step. Now, on this side here, there's a couple of things we have to do. So one thing we have to do is we have to start giving it additional context with the initial entries of the memory router. So when you configure the memory router, you're basically, you have the ability to add these initial entries here. And let's see here. So, okay, so we've got initial entries, and we want to basically have, we want to basically say that the location path name, if it's /contact, so this is the path we're on, then basically replace it with empty. Otherwise, just use a slash. And what this is going to do is this is going to help kind of initialize the state of the router to keep it consistent with this having a /, but in reality, the path you're on is /contact, right? So again, if we go back into our application, just to kind of show here that it doesn't have any impact into what's going on right now, but it will. So the second thing that we want to do here is we want to create a hook, and I'm just going to use a hook here because to me it kind of makes the most sense, and I'm going to call this the use sync global router hook, and this is just something canned that I'm going to just paste in here. And there's a decent amount going on in the code here, so let me kind of walk through this. So the first thing is this is a hook that takes in this base name concept. So in React Router, you have a concept of a base name, which is your kind of path prefix for your application. We technically don't have a base name, right? Where, in the host, it's just empty. But in the remote, we technically do, and that's /contact, right? That is our base path. So it takes a base path in as a parameter, and the path that it tries to configure is either going to be /contact or whatever that path is. So basically, if this comes in as a /, we're just going to get rid of it because it's just /contact. We don't want /contact/. Otherwise, it's going to be /contact, the path name. And what this is going to end up being is, basically form or, chat. So that's basically what this is kind of creating here. And what we're going to do is we're going to rely on window events to sync this between the applications, right? So even though it's running within kind of the same application here, we're going to create these events to push the data, pub submodel, through, the window object. And basically what we're going to do is when the remote changes routes, so it's in a use effect here, anytime this location object changes, what's going to happen is it's going to dispatch an event, and the event's name is just app. It's not fancy here. This could be the name of your remote. It needs to probably be more distinct in a larger environment. And we're going to put that new path object as the detail on the custom event. And then essentially what we're going to do is add a listener for the shell. So now we're telling the shell, hey, we've changed routes, right? And we're dispatching it. We need to also listen to the shell. And when the shell changes here, so I'll just call this shell navigated to make it a little more clear. We're going to run this callback here. And this is going to check to see okay, if the shell is navigating to the same path that I'm already on, just ignore it. Otherwise, go ahead and navigate my router context into whatever that path is, right? So just using these right out of React Router. So now that this is configured on this side here, we have to put this somewhere within our application. And what we can do is we can come up here and we could put it in this this component here. So we'll create a new one and we'll call it like route handler, just as an example. And we will just return the outlet. So we want to use the sync global router, and we're going to give it a base name of /contact. This is technically what our path is. And then router handler is what we're going to serve here as the base path. So if I run this and I come back and I look at the routes, you can see, again, nothing changes, and it's because we're not listening to the event on the host side, right? We're publishing it, but there's really nothing that's going on. It's just publishing it, nobody's listening, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the host. We have a hooks folder in here. We're going to call this use sync app router. It's probably not a great name, but it's just the name that I have chosen. Again, this is pretty much canned code, and this looks the exact same as the other hooks. So when you go back here and you look at this, it's basically looking at the two hooks, right? You got location and navigate. You've got, in this case, there's two use effects here, and there's a reason that there's two use effects. Here I can add this as well. Let's see, base path, also a dependency on navigate. It's got a lot of dependencies. And basically there's two in here for a couple of reasons. So your first one up here is going to be pretty much identical to what you saw in the other one. So we're going to have a, so let's go back to the other one real quick. We're dispatching events of app because it's our app making the change, but we're listening on shell. Here, this is actually a little error. We're going to be dispatching on shell and we're going to be listening on app, right? So the app navigated, but we're broadcasting on shell. So we're going to be syncing these in. And the second use effect is going to be dispatching. So it's going to say that if our path matches our base path, right? This is the base path for the app, why it's called sync app router. It's very app specific. And again, these event names would probably be more distinct. But if it starts with that path, then we want to go ahead and we want to send that path out. And then basically the idea here is if we take the current path, we're going to strip out that that prefix, right? So /contact in this case. So I'm going to go over to app, and now I want to sync it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new component. Let's just call it up here, and we'll call it app router handler. And basically, we're going to pull in this hook, pretty much the same as we did on the other one. It's got a base path object here, so we're going to call this, it's not contact, we're going to call it it's not hero, it's contact, and we are just going to return, in this case, we're going to return our suspense contact component. And if we put app router handler in here, which should probably be called contact router handler, but okay. So now that this is set up here, we're passing in our base path here. This is an asterisk. We're going to go back to our application and we're just going to refresh it. We're going to go into form. So if we look at our error here, it's going to say that there's no route that matches /contact/form. And this is because of a small bug here in my code. Let me go ahead and in the sync app router, I shouldn't be emitting an event right away because I'm already emitting an event down here with some special case logic in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, I'm going to just refresh, make sure everything's clean. And you'll see when I click on the routes now for chat or for form that the URL actually changes here. So you can see /chat/form. And these, if I refresh the page, it'll stay in sync here. So this is kind of a basic example of syncing the router context between the shell and the remote application. And it's a bi-directional sync, right? So one's producing events up, one's producing events down, and then they're preventing a cyclical kind of rendering loop, right? So it's able to detect if it's not on the same, if it's on the same path, and just short circuit the logic. So right now that basically looks like these hooks here. So the idea, again, just to recap, is that from my remote perspective, I am subscribing to changes in the shell and basically determining when I navigate. When my location updates in my remote, so this is when I click like a link object in the remote, it's going to dispatch this event on the app channel. So in the host, what we're going to do is we're going to subscribe to the app channel, and we're going to determine when to navigate. Now, we need to navigate the browser router, right, to get the URL to change. The other one is just the memory router. So likewise, when the host changes path, we need to dispatch down to the app, but we need to just remove that base path so it aligns with this router config in the remote, right? It's not /contact here. So we got to kind of strip that out. So that's kind of a quick example of using the router. You can see how that nested router is very complex, and still, even in our example here, you'll see that let me go back and save this real quick. So you'll see that even in our example here, if I hit return to home, it still doesn't have a context of what home is, right? It doesn't know because it's localized within its router configuration. So again, going back to kind of the different ways to register your routes, if you don't need the complexity of nested routes, then I would strongly, suggest kind of a top level router configuration. If you need the routes, you're within the remote, right? If you need that router down there, then you could definitely expand on this example, make it better, fix things. You could maybe add like a hidden route that when you go to it, it redirects to like the home, the home URL. There's probably a couple of things you could do there, just kind of off the top of my head. And the other thing to kind of consider too with this is, again, if you need this kind of complexity down here, you could mark it as a singleton, and you could then go ahead and use those link objects like we showed at the beginning of the video. And kind of the last thing to consider there is, if you do that, well, what if I want to test my Hero remote locally? And all you have to do is you have to make sure that in your Hero remote, so like let's say if I went to the Bootstrap file and I wanted to test it right now, I just have this empty div here. I really don't have anything running in Hero. I would just instantiate my own browser router or whatever at the top level here. So when I run my application, that context is there for that component that's relying on the context, right? That link component, relies on that context. So that covers the routing configuration here and different ways you can configure it, highlights some of the pros and cons. Thank you for watching the video. I hope this has been helpful. Stay tuned for my next video. We'll be diving a little bit further into shared state, where we kind of saw a little bit of that here with the context issue. So in that shared state video, we'll jump into different state libraries and different ways to sync them. It might be a two-part video. Anyways, thanks for watching.